Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Cabin Fever Crochet with me, Helene here. Today I have a super cute and fun, quick and easy little pattern field of Clovers Garland that you can use St. Patrick's Day or throughout the season. I have added a tassel to it with beads, which is optional. Now this is a free Willow's yarn pattern, which I have permission to do a tutorial here on my channel and make modifications and adjustments, which I have done. Willow Yarns is a Hirschner's division. I'm going to leave the link below where you can get the pattern, print that out if you like, or follow it along on your device. There is what I perceive as an error, and so I have made that correction, and that way that you can just write down the corrections as we go if this is something that you would like to make again. So I am going to go over the yarn and the supplies if you would like to make the tassel. It's really simple, and I am going to show you only how I attach the tassel to the end of the garland, and I do have a video on a really simple, quick and easy tassel, my way of making one in just a few minutes, and I will leave the link below to that, as well as the supplies that I will be using. And the option is for a 3 or a 4-leaf clover, and I will explain to you how to do both of them. And the pattern number is W00342, or you can just go to willowyarns.com or hirschners.com and type in Field of Clovers Garland. So I have all my little notes here that I've made, and some little additions and things I did on the back. So I wanted to show you what that looks like. So as far as supplies go, of course you'll need yarn. Now they use the Willow Yarns Wash Worsted, which is 100% anti-pill acrylic, 180 yards for a 100-gram ball, 3.5 ounces. I did not have that. I think you can use just about any yarn in maybe a light number 4, worsted 3 to a worsted number 4. I would not go any thicker than that. And after testing out a few yarns, I would stick with ones that are smooth but not real dense and tightly spun. That way, if you get something that's kind of middle of the road, then you will have a nice stitch definition and the little kind of ruffles of how the clovers look with the separation within each petal. Because if you are using a yarn that has a lot of halo, or that's like a really fuzzy worsted, that will tend to blur your stitch definition, and then your clovers won't stand out as much as to what they're actually supposed to be. And I remembered, aha, I have a skein of the Lion brand Ice Cream Cotton Blend yarn, 47 cotton, 53 acrylic. It's a number 4, but it's a very light number 4 at 225 yards for the same amount, 100 gram versus 180. And I am going to work today. This is Red Heart Soft. It's 100% acrylic. I just wanted to show you what I have here. And also, while I have this out, before you get started, I just want to let you know that when you do the garland and you hang it, if you could see how they flipped from, here they are, the clovers all lined up in the front, and when you hang it, they tend to turn into a more just kind of free form, random, some in the front, some in the back. So you can leave them free form like that, or if you, depending on where and how you're going to hang them, if you are going to hang them where it's up against the wall, that would be easy to just turn these facing upright forward with the right side up. Or if you're going to hang them when they're draping down below a wall or a surface, If you want them all facing forward, a couple of ideas. You can either just very simply take a piece of thread, tack the center, or however you want them to lay, the center back of the clover to your chain in between, and just do just a very light simple tack, knot it, and just trim the ends. I wouldn't even sew those in. If you cut them flush enough, it'll blend, you won't see them. Or depending on the type of yarn you're using, if you have a hot glue gun or fabric glue, you can just put a little dot, a dab will do you, and attach that, let that set and dry just enough to keep it in place. If you're using a hot glue gun, be careful, because if you're using a synthetic yarn, it could melt it, so you might want to just do a little, cut a couple of, just a strand of yarn and test that out. And then a hook, corresponding hook on this, with this yarn it recommends a 5mm, which is a little bit smaller than I think what would be standard for this amount of yardage, that gauge. I think usually a 5.5i hook, but you can test it out and see. But it does, going down, it does help give them the shape and help them pop and stand out a little bit. And I used an H in the ice cream yarn, and I think I'm going to try to start with an H. I haven't tested this, the 5mm. And what I did with my beads is kind of, I went with a theme. I put the green in the center, and then I have these amber gold colors, which represents my pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Okay, so bead wise, if you want to do like a tassel and add beads, you will need, of course, your like a yarn needle, your regular yarn needle corresponding with the gauge of your yarn, but you will also need a big eye beading needle. This is by Bead Smith, and they're very inexpensive, but they're flexible, and then you can open that up, and you aren't limited to a large bead to fit a regular size needle, but you still need to be able to fit the gauge of your yarn through that. And I got these at a bead shop fairly near me, but I also ordered them online at Artbeads, again link below. On Artbeads they come in these little tubes here, and these are a size 3, so you will either find them at size 3 or 3/0. Okay, let's start by making a slip knot however you normally do it. Just leave enough tail at the end, because we are going to use this if you are adding a tassel to work our beads onto that. Okay, doesn't need to be a whole lot, but I mean just enough to work with. All right, and then I am going to work the 3-leaf clover. The 4-leaf is pretty much the same, except that you are just going to be adding one more repeat. All right, so the pattern says to chain 13 to begin. You can chain however long you want. This is just going to depend on how much length that you want at the end to hang. So if you want some of this chain to drape down off of the edge, which I think gives a really nice kind of little look, you can add more to it than that. And that's for the 3-leaf clover, and the 4-leaf says chain 23. Well, I'm just going to chain 20 for both. That's how I did mine. Okay, so go ahead and make your chain. And when you make your chain, don't have big gaps in between. You want them to be consistent. So take your time, make sure they're nice and even and look pretty like that. Okay. All right, here are my 20 chains, and now we are going to slip stitch into the 1, 2, 3, third chain from the hook. I'm just going into the outside loop, and don't slip stitch tight. And before I run this loop through the other loop on my hook, I am going to anchor this with my finger to keep that little circle here open, because that is what we are going to work into. Now we're going to begin with the first part of our petal, and as you can see that each petal has 2 sections, and we're going to work each of the 2 sections into the very same stitch as we go around. Okay, all right, now chain 1 and single crochet into that hole you just made, and do that a little bit loosely, not tight, because we're going to work into this on the way back around, and it all has to fit into this small space. There's your first single crochet. Now make 3 more on this side of your chain. Doesn't say that in the pattern. This is how I did it. Okay, and then you are going to turn and then make 4 more on the other side of your chain for a total of 8. And this is for the 3-leaf clover. Now if you are working the 4-leaf clover, then you would fit 10 double crochets, 5 on each side of your chain. The pattern calls for 6 or 8, but in order to get the chain centered in between the petals of the clover and to have a little separation of the leaves, I added 2 more single crochets to that. Slip stitch into the first single crochet, chain 3. Now we're going to create a cluster, yarn over, insert your hook into that very same stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. You have 3 on your hook. Yarn over, pull through the first 2. You will do that again, yarn over into the same stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Now yarn over, pull through all 3. That is a 2 double crochet cluster, and now we're going to chain 3 and then slip stitch back into the same stitch, and that is the first half of our first leaf. And then repeat that process all over again. All right, chain 3, cluster, yarn over, all back into that same space. Don't accidentally go over to the next single crochet. You see how tight that's getting, and why I said do that first one a little bit loosely. Okay, yarn over and you pull through the first 2. 2 more, yarn over, go through all 3 loops, chain 3, slip stitch back into that very first single crochet. Alright, now for the second petal, the pattern says to slip stitch into the next stitch, and then you begin this process all over again. When I did that, they were really bunched up and caused too much ruffling and rippling and congestion within this group. And so with other flowers that I've done, and then after practicing this, what I did was I slip stitched in the next, then I slip stitched in the next, and then begin with the next group of petals. All right, so again, chain 3, work your cluster, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, do that again, and then yarn over, pull through all 3, chain 3 again to finish the last portion of the clover, and go back into that very same stitch and slip stitch, and then we repeat that again all into the same stitch. chain 3, finish your cluster. Okay, and slip stitch into the next, and then your third clover. Alright, and that is the first part. Now we do that one more time. So you will have 6 kind of petals, so to speak, 6 leaves. As you know, clovers have 2 that are connected with the dip in the center. Okay, so here for the last, all into that same stitch. Slip stitch. Sorry, I'm getting hung up on my everything here. Now if you are working your 4-leaf clover, then you would just repeat this sequence one more time, making another set of your clover. Alright, so then I have 3 left, and I'm going to slip stitch into the next into the back loop only, which keeps the loop on the top, on the edge, instead of having a lump on the front and extra stitches. And then in the next stitch I am going to slip stitch through both loops, and if you only have 2 stitches, that's okay. Then you would skip slip stitching into the back loop and just go ahead and slip stitch through both loops on the next. And then now we're going to create the chain part of our garland, and you can space however many you want in between, however you want it to look. I noticed on the pattern that Lorna Miser, by the way, who created this, I really like a lot of her designs. She has 1 on the edge and then groups of 2. I just went ahead and did my groups of 2, however you want to do it. And what I did for mine, if you like how mine are spaced, I put 10 chains between each of the 2 clovers together, and then 14 chains in between the sets of 2 clovers. I hope that makes sense. So here's my first clover. Now my second one, I'm going to chain 10. And then again you're going to slip stitch in the 3rd chain from the hook, and remember to keep that space open and don't slip stitch that tight. Chain 1, and then you work your 8 single crochets with 4 on each side. So there's 2, 3, 4 on each side of your chain, that is. So that way you have an even amount on each side, and then your chain remains in the center. Alright, and then 1, 2, oh that was, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, yeah, 3, 4, okay, then slip stitch to that beginning single crochet, and then begin your clover again. Chain 3, work your cluster, make sure you're going down into that very same stitch that you just slip stitched into, okay, and then you repeat all over again, okay. So there's the first part, the second half of the clover, all worked into the same stitch. Then you slip stitch into the next, slip stitch into the next, and then work your second group of clovers. So here I did my 10 chains, which when I slip stitched into the third from the hook, that leaves me 7 chains to space in between my group of 2. And then in between each group of 2, this is where I chained 14, which leaves me 11. So there's a little separation, if you can see that, between each group. And then when you get to the end, you go ahead and you chain the same number as you began, so you have the same amount at both ends. Okay, so to attach to the other side, and I did this a little bit different than how I attach to other projects because of the size of the beads, and because these are not large hole and my regular yarn needle is not going to pass through, I had to improvise and come up with yet another way. So I have my little beads, my pot of gold, my beading needle, my yarn needle. See if I can remember how I did this. All right. I went ahead and the 2 strands that are at the top that you have after making the tassel, I went ahead and I used my yarn needle and I fed this through the center, somewhere in the center, out the other end. Don't want to pull that too tight, just enough to get your end through, because otherwise you're going to wind up cinching that top part down and giving it see, a little smashed funny shape. But you can always just boop boop pop that back up. Alright, so I'm going to do the same with the other side, making sure I don't catch my yarn. That's part of the tassel in the process. Okay, I did pull it down a little bit. That's easy. So in the trim that off a little bit later. And then I'm going to grab my beading needle, bring my yarn through. I'm not going to leave too much of a tail, because then that's more thickness that the beads have to pass through. And then I put my beads on in the sequence I want them. Okay. And just feed those through. And then I'm going to take this beading needle off, put my yarn needle back on. Okay, leave those beads at the top for now. Then I'm going to go just underneath the top of the knot, feed that through, feed the yarn through, try to fit my knot as close to the top as possible, and then I'm going to turn so I'm halfway around and fit my yarn under the knot, not go through it but underneath it to the other side to lock that in. Then I'm going to roll it again and make one more pass through to the other side. That way it centers it, and really that's it. That's all I do. You can run it back through one more time to the other side if you want, just to be sure that's really buried in there, well, locked in, and then go back down to the center. Okay. And that can just be part of your tassel. There we go. Now I just played around with it, had the idea in my head, and just figured it out until I got it the way I wanted it. Then you can just trim off the rest of those ends. Alrighty, my fiber friends and family, that wraps up today's tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll have fun making this. Please come back again next time for more yarny fun. Comment, subscribe, thumbs up, and share. And until next time, take care, and I will see you then.